All right. Hello, everyone. Um, I feel like our next presenter doesn't really need an introduction, but I will introduce her anyway. Um, I'm sure most of you know Carol Walker. She is an advocate. She is a photographer. She is an author. She's published a few books. She has a blog. She has a podcast. She's involved in litigation, fighting for wild horses. I'm not sure if I missed anything. If I did, Carol, I'm sure that you can
Oh,
fill
didn't.
everybody else in, but she's done a lot of things and she spent a lot of years advocating. So we're really happy to have her here today. So welcome, Carol, and I will turn things over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak about my very favorite thing, which is wild horses. I really appreciate everybody here today. And do keep in mind, we're going to have plenty of time for questions, and I love answering questions. I'll just get started. Um, I have to admit, I stumbled into having a cause. In 2004, 4 years after I started my horse photography business, I was invited to go on a photo tour of wild horses in Wyoming. The area was called Adobe Town. And after 2 days of watching wild horses and their families, not just surviving, but thriving in the wild and dramatic and arid lands of Adobe Town, I was completely captivated. I returned again and again, and I got to know several families who didn't run when I approached, and they got used to my presence. And especially a battle scarred older gray stallion with a small family who let me sit with them for hours. One of my most treasured memories was sitting and watching the gorgeous older gray mare nursing her hours old foal with the whole family surrounding her. The time I spent with these horses took my breath away, enchanted me, and gave me a sense of peace that I treasured. I returned again and again. And then in the summer of 2005, I found out that most of the wild horses in this herd were going to be rounded up with a helicopter and removed from their homes. I was shocked and I was saddened and I was determined to witness this. Seeing horses that I had gotten to know running terrified from the helicopter, and then watching very young foals separated from their mothers and the stallions from the mares, and afterwards hauled out on huge semis was absolutely horrific. I couldn't even look at the photos that I'd taken until 4 months later. But I became determined to help these horses and show that they were not starving, they weren't dying of thirst, but they're uniquely suited to living with their families on these wild lands that they call home. They deserved to live their lives wild and free. And so I wrote my first coffee table book, Wild Hoofbeats, America's Vanishing Wild Horses. It tells a story with photographs of the families in Adobe Town, the roundup, and then the aftermath. And through my photographs, my advocacy was born. I spoke all over the country with a slideshow of my photos so that people could see and understand the magnificence of these special wild beings. I talked about the Bureau of Land Management and the issues facing wild horses in America. I started posting photographs of the wild horses on my Wild Hoofbeats blog and on social media after the last helicopter roundup in the Prairie Mountains of Montana in 2009. That roundup was a turning point for the advocacy movement because we discovered that using our words and our photographs on blogs and social media was the best possible way to publicize our cause and get people caring about our wild horses because they were so astonishingly beautiful, wild and proud and free, a taste of freedom coming to people through their computer screens. More and more people started caring about wild horses, writing letters to their senators and representatives and taking action. More organizations to protect them were formed. I wrote 2 more coffee table books about wild horses, Galloping to Freedom and Blue Zeus. I produced calendars first for the Cloud Foundation and then for Wild Horse Freedom Federation with images of the horses I had grown to know and love. Wyoming was where I started with wild horses, and Wyoming's wild horses are the ones I return to again and again, finding that visiting the same herds over and over allows me to develop a relationship with the horses where I get to know their families, their homes, and I can tell stories about them that engage people and make them want to help. I spent hundreds of hours each year spend hundreds of hours each year in some of the most remote places in Wyoming, observing, documenting, and photographing wild horses. And I find that the more time I spend with them, the more I learn about them and the more powerful my photographs become. My friend Ginger Catherines was the first filmmaker to follow a wild horse, Cloud, from birth throughout his life and sharing stories about his herd through her films. Those films tell stories about the lives of wild horses with names, personalities, and relationships. And people could see that wild horses were unique and deserved to be protected. They move people to care about wild horses. When I talked to her about films versus photography, she said a film may tell a story, but a photograph has to tell a story in one frame. Photographs are one of the most powerful tools there are to communicate a message and illuminate a situation. They provide a window into another world that can draw people in and elicit emotional response. When people see a tender photo of a mare with her foal, a family napping together, horses running for the sheer joy in life, or a stallion fighting to protect his family, those images make an impact on the viewer. There's an energy behind these images, and it is powerful. On the other hand, the shock value of a photograph of horses, eyes wide with fear, running from a helicopter, a foal being roped and thrown to the ground by a wrangler, or the horses crowded into filthy holding pens with all the light gone out of their eyes, can be useful with shock value to illustrate abuse and a need for change. But many people are not going to be able to cope with those images. It only makes sense to be sensitive to the effect your images have on others. It's all about energy, the energy of the horses, the energy of the photographer, as well as the energy of the viewer. This translates in social media. I go to roundups so I can be a witness to these horses, and having my eyes and camera on site during the roundup pushes the contractors who are rounding up the horses to be more careful, to do better, even if they keep me so far away that it's hard to see everything that's going on. Those upsetting photographs can move people to act, to write letters, to contact their senators and representatives, to do a talk for their local schools or organizations, to donate to legal funds to support lawsuits protecting wild horses, adopt a wild horse or several, donate to a sanctuary, all actions that can help. I really thought back in 2005 that it would only take a few years to save our wild horses. But today, thousands and thousands of people now know about wild horses and care for them and want to help them stay wild and free on our public lands. I believe strongly that if there were not so many people aware of the issues and willing to work to save them, that they would all be gone by now. So how can you help? If you visit and photograph wild horses, get those photographs out there. Social media is an ideal place for sharing photographs of wild horses. And don't forget to talk about the image you're sharing. It does not matter what platform you use: Instagram, Meta, Threads, YouTube, Blue Sky, Sunstack. Tag wild horses, join groups, and post there as well. The more you post, the greater your reach. You can also do live events talking about wild horses. Tell people the horse's name, what you know about him or her, and what herd management area the horse lives in, what state they live in. Videos are wonderful too. Videos have become insanely easy to take on the new phones, and people love videos. Sharing your images and your observations and thoughts about the horses gets people involved, touches their hearts, and immediately makes them want to keep our wild horses wild. From sharing on social media to writing to your local paper or informing journalists, meeting with your senators and representatives, it's all part of it. If you don't have your own images, share the images of others. Either ask permission of the photographer, absolutely, or use the share function on Meta, for example. Look for stories about wild horses that you find inspiring and repost them. When people care, they want to act. And tell people to get out there and see wild horses where they roam free. There's nothing like being actually in the presence of these magnificent beings to inspire and move people to action. This is a time of tremendous change in our country. Doug Burgum, former governor of North Dakota, has just been confirmed as the Secretary of the Interior. He will appoint the new director of the Bureau of Land Management, who needs to be confirmed. We don't know who he will select, and we don't have any say over his choice. The important thing to keep in mind is that we care deeply about wild horses. That's a constant. That will not change no matter who is in charge. So I'm encouraging you to continue to express that love and caring and determination to save wild horses and to look for openings to move forward and make changes to help them. Images giving a window into the lives of wild horses are a wonderful tool to empower your efforts. There are many organizations and individuals working to save our wild horses. They don't all agree exactly how to go about that, and that's absolutely fine. Everyone has their own strengths and contexts and points of view. Everyone has their role to play. We need everyone who cares about wild horses. Everyone has a contribution to make. We need you all. Get involved where you can. And I'm going to encourage you to go to my Freedom for Wild Horses podcast, which now has 47 episodes, to learn more about wild horses, the issues facing them, and advocating for them. So that's all I have to present. And I really welcome some questions. I would love to answer them.
Thank you, Carol. That was great. Brooke wants to know, you may remember that I am talking to the BLM in person directly soon. Hope to talk with you too in person. It's a good idea to view the wild horses. What a joy. Please let us know if we can go with you, schedule permitting. Someone else asked, is there current legislation for federal protection for all wild horses? Yes, we have the Wild and Free Roaming Wild Horse and Burro Act, meaning no roundups and, if absolutely necessary, safe and temporary birth control. Yeah, there have been a lot of amendments to the Wild Horse and Burro Act, and those are part of the problems. But like Carol said, we have a new administration coming in, and I think we have to do more than be hopeful. We have to just start being more vocal. I think that that's really kind of going to be a key. So Craig says, I think the very most powerful way of getting people to care about wild horse and burros is to go out and observe them in the wild in their legal habitats on the BLM or U.S. Forest Service habitats. Yeah, I agree, Craig. Even the National Park Service, we have a lot of national parks that have wild horses also, and those horses aren't protected unless they got federal protection. Can you talk, maybe Carol will talk about the amendments. Do you know anything about any of the amendments to the Wild Horse and Burro Act?
Well, there was the Burns Amendment. That was the big one, which changed it to if a horse was not offered for adoption 3 times and not adopted, it's available to be sold without limitation, as well as any horses over 10 allowed to be sold for without limitation. So that was the big amendment to the Wild Horse and Burro Act.
And without limitation, you mean that they could also be sold to slaughter now?
No, they're not sold to slaughter. They can be sold to individuals without any sort of limitation on it. Meaning, when you adopt a wild horse, you have to wait a year to get title of the horse. And in the case of a sale horse, the horse is sold immediately, titled, which means that the buyer can dump them at slaughter, as Tom Davis did with hundreds and hundreds of horses, and which is happening right now because of the adoption incentive program, where over 2,000 wild horses have been documented ending up in slaughter auctions because their buyer, their adopter, actually got their money and then dumped them.
Heather says, Carol, you've seen so many tragic events, but yet you still seem hopeful. What's your secret to staying optimistic?
Well, as I said, if people had not gotten involved the way that they have now, I don't think there'd be any horses left. So even though I know a lot of people, it's easy to get discouraged. It is. A lot of people are discouraged that, they've signed letters, they've signed petitions, they've made calls, they've done all these things, and it hasn't fixed the issue. I think that we have been holding our ground. And I think that lawsuits right now are the number one thing that is actually making change and stopping the most egregious things. Um, and there have been a number of successful lawsuits pursued to protect wild horses. And I think spending as much time as I do with the horses, I can't give up on them. When I'm there with them, I there is no feeling on earth better for me than being with them. And I feel compelled to represent them as best I can and to help them stay free. And it is heartbreaking when we lose horses through roundups and through death or accidents. It's absolutely heartbreaking, but there are still horses there, and there are still wonderful horses there. And I just feel that this is my life's work, to speak for these horses and save them. So that's how I keep my spirits up.
Okay. Krista wants to know, what herds do you visit in Wyoming?
I've been to all the herds in Wyoming, but the ones that I visit most often are McCullough Peaks, Adobe Town, Salt Wells Creek, um, and the Red Desert Complex, which is Green Mountain, Antelope Hills, Crooks Mountain, Stewart Creek, and Lost Creek. So those are the ones that I'm spending the most time in. And I find that going back over and over, you get to know the horses, you get to know the landscape, you get to know where the horses might be. You can also see, the effects of livestock grazing and degradation. You can also, sadly, after the winter of 2022, 2023, see horses that perished because of the horrible, horrific winter. You can see the conditions that they face. You can see a lot of things. So I find it very valuable to visit the same herds over and over again.
Can you please give us an update on the lawsuit regarding the checkerboard herds in Wyoming?
Sure. So we lost the initial case, but we appealed to the 10th Circuit Court, and we have a court date. Yay! In March, and it's March 18th in Denver. And I'm planning to go. All of the plaintiffs are going, and our attorney is very encouraged and hopeful that we were going to win, because it's basically the same grounds that we won on back in 2017. So the good news about it being in March is that the Salt Wells Creek Adobe Town Roundup is scheduled for July currently. That may change, but we wanted to make sure, we really, really wanted to uh, have this oral argument before the roundup, because during the roundup they could zero the herds out. So that is a good thing. And our attorney worked over Christmas to make sure that we got everything in so that we could have that March oral argument. So that's where we are now. So we'll have a lot more news after the judges rule. There's 3 judges that will be hearing the oral arguments and then making a decision.
Okay. Craig wants to know, do you know of any public lands ranchers that buck the anti-wild horse people?
I'm sorry, I'm not quite following.
Do you know of any public lands ranchers that buck the anti-wild horse people? I don't know, Craig, can you elaborate a little bit? We're not understanding the question.
There are definitely some ranchers that are not against the wild horses. That is for sure. Yeah, if that's the question.
Do you have tips for people visiting the range? What should they take with them to find and spot horses?
Sure. Um, yeah, so binoculars are very helpful, especially because the horses aren't necessarily going to be near you. Make sure it's usually a good idea to have a 4-wheel drive vehicle and don't go when it's wet. Absolutely not. You can get stuck. And so the binoculars, I would bring water, food with you in case you get stuck. Absolutely have a full-size spare tire. And really it's very helpful if you can find the water holes, because you will often find the horses coming into water or leaving water, and so sometimes it's just a matter of driving around. And unfortunately the horses are they don't necessarily go to the same places all the time, and I've found over the years that where they spend their time does change on the range. So there's a lot of driving and looking. Full tank of gas, absolutely.
Heather, Heather says there was some pretty amazing coordination and cooperation to make sure the McCullough Peaks horses had safe landings. What lessons can we take forward from this moving forward? How can we replicate and or come close to replicating this with other roundups?
Well, so it kind of was a special case because there were only 40 horses for one thing. Remember that. It wasn't, like 586 that were removed from White Mountain. The horses were very well known as well. So that really helped. Um, we can't save and put in a sanctuary every single wild horse in holding. It's just not going to happen. There's 67,000 wild horses in holding facilities currently. I think with a smaller herd, it works. I know Sandwash Basin in Colorado, there was a lot of coordination and a lot of people who adopted these horses, and a lot of horses went to the Wild Horse Refuge in Colorado. So that was a really special case. So I think it depends on the herd. If it's a very popular herd, you're going to have a lot of easier time finding homes for the horses. And collaboration is key. So we all worked together. There were several of us who were working very hard to get the word out, raise money, and that made a difference. So my goal this year is to find more allies, more people to work with, more people with money, more people with influence, more people who can sponsor, more people who can collaborate. So I think that's a very important thing to do as far as saving the horses.
Wendy wants to know, how long after oral arguments does it take to get a decision?
I don't know. And Bill doesn't know either. So it's going to be very much up to the judges. I can't even remember how long it was from the last time. It was at least a month. So, but I think it's safe to say that with the roundup coming in July, I feel pretty confident that we'll get a decision before then.
Okay. Craig said he's asking, do you know of any public lands ranchers that oppose anti-wild horse people?
Um, Oppose as in doing something about it? I no, I don't know.
Okay. Diane wants to know, what is your opinion, the most important thing we can do now to help the horses in the lawsuit?
Oh, contribute to the legal fund. Absolutely. So there are three different lawsuits. They're all getting heard at the same time. The one I'm a plaintiff on is American Wild Horse Conservation, and you can definitely donate to their legal fund. If you don't have the funds to donate, you can get the word out and let other people know and tell your friends and donate to the legal fund. That will make a difference.
Okay. Lori says, I think that horrible winter would have had far fewer deaths if so many horses hadn't been removed from San Wash Basin just before. I think that many of the older horses would have known places to shelter better, and the disruption of the bans from the roundup meant less families to huddle together. Do you think that's true for some of the Wyoming herds as well?
We had a roundup in 2020 that took a lot of the horses. And the problem was it was the worst winter since 1973. And I actually flew over the area in February, and it was a solid wall of snow. And there were areas where it was 16 feet deep. And there was no possible way because the snow was socked in from December to April, and the horses just ran out of food. So I don't know that the Roundup contributed to any deaths that happened in Sandwash, but there really wasn't anything to do about in Wyoming. And Adobe Town was really the epicenter of the worst of the deaths. And I've gone back there this last year and could find so few horses. And the sad thing about the winter was so many of the mares died. They were either nursing or carrying foals, and it just hit them harder. And so there's all these bachelor stallions, and there's a lot of fighting, and it's very discouraging seeing that. Nature will balance it out. We'll have more fillies born in Wyoming and Sandwash too, I'm sure, to balance it out. But right now, it's things are very kind of unstable.
I think, and I've never been to San Wash Basin, so I'm not sure, but I know like even here in North Dakota, when it snows, it's very hard to tell where you're walking. You know what I mean? Like you're walking and everything's fine, and all of a sudden you're like thigh high in snow. And I'm sure the animals go through the same things. And so those are things that I think people just can't visualize. Um, we don't
Yeah,
walk very often here when we've got a lot of snow because you can't tell where the washes are or where the big drops are or or what's going to happen. So that definitely contributes, I'm sure.
yeah.
Cecile wants to know, what kind of camera gear do you have and what lens or how much of a telephoto lens?
So I have well, 2.5 years ago, I had purchased 200 to 500 lens, which for me is ideal. I used to carry a 600 lens around, and it was a heavy beast, and my back started hurting. So I have a mirrorless camera, the Canon R3, and I use it with this 200 to 500 lens, which is so much lighter and it's very versatile. So I find that to be just really a perfect length. At the roundups, I use an 800 lens because most of the time I'm like a mile to 2 or 3 miles away, and the horses are little dots, and at least they're bigger little dots with a longer lens.
Um, Krista wants to know, what is the best time of year to visit Wyoming? Is there a map for people who want to visit and photograph the herds? Had no idea there were so many when you shared the herds you visit.
So the BLM used to have maps on the websites of all the HMAs, and they took them down. So it depends. Like Sandwash has a great map on it. McCullough Peaks has a map. Um, and the best time of year, I think, is May. That is my favorite, hands down, time of year to see the horses. You have all the babies being born, you have action with the stallions, you have all sorts of good things. So May, June is really my favorite time of year to go see the horses. April's tricky because you can still get a lot of snow and mud, and you can get mud in May too. but that's really the best time. Go on the website of the areas that you're interested in, and there will be some information, not necessarily maps, but some of them do have maps.
So how can I help? Can I testify? I know I could submit testimony online for the Theodore Roosevelt National Park wild horses, for example. Are there Zoom court meetings for the lawsuits to stop the roundups?
I don't know. I will be, if there is a way for people to watch, I will definitely online, I will definitely let people know. There's no testimony from any of us. It's basically the attorneys doing the oral argument. So there's no testimony involved.
So this is also different than what's happening with Theodore Roosevelt National Park. This is a court case. We're working with our legislators to get laws passed. So that's why there's open public testimony for that.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes
Um,
sense.
do you have any suggestions on how to encourage various wild horse groups to collaborate? And if you do, Carol, can you please write a book about it?
Well, so, you know, I'm kind of a lone ranger. I don't have a 501c3. I don't have a group, but I do collaborate with groups like the Cloud Foundation, AWHC. I I collaborate with different groups from time to time. So I think it's a matter of if the groups have things in common, they do collaborate. And certainly Western Watersheds is on our lawsuit, and they've been a terrific partner through the years on lawsuits and help with a lot of things. So not everybody gets along. That's just the way it is. And but it doesn't mean that that's bad. It just means the different people are doing different things, and they can collaborate when they want to. And I'm always open to collaboration with different groups.
Collaboration is a big word that we've heard throughout the last few days. I think the majority of the presentations have talked about collaboration. Um, any of us
Good.
can call Congress at any time. Question, yes, you can call Congress. You can call the switchboard. You can look up your legislators and call their offices. You can do online forms to contact them. Yeah, Heather shared some information. Yeah.
Good.
Craig wants to know, are fences a big problem in Adobe Town and other Wyoming HMAs as far as restricting the natural movements of the free roaming Mustangs?
I don't know that they are in Adobe Town, but in the Red Desert Complex, yes. And there are fences that are supposed to be put down in the winter. And sometimes they are not. And fencing can be a big, huge thing. If there are enormous snow drifts, horses can get caught in fences. They can not might end up not being able to migrate the way that they need to from different parts of the HMA. So and then in the checkerboard area, see, you have a checkerboard of private and public land, and they're 1 mile square. So you can't fence out uh, a 1 mile square area. So there isn't a lot of fencing in those areas.
Janine wants to know, how can donors be assured donations are allocated specifically for legal funds?
Oh, when you donate, you can let them know. That's not a problem. There used to be it used to be divided up and you could do to different things, but just send them an email and say, I want this money to be applied to to this lawsuit specifically. It's not a problem.
Diane wants to know, would showing up in court have any effect on the decisions?
No, not at all. Not at all. And we have to make sure that we're very polite and don't really make a nuisance of ourselves. So it's not going to weigh the judges any one way or another.
Someone's asking, and Heather, maybe you can share the Wild Horse Advocacy Actions page. Can someone create a chat to stay connected, share information, etc.? We're thinking about those things, but we do have a Facebook page for action items, so that might be something we'll look at too.
I just threw that link in the chat box there, Chris.
Okay, thanks. Um, A lot of people interested in maps. Okay. All right. Well, I don't see any other questions. If I missed anything, you guys let me know. But there are a bunch of ways. Cecile says, in any case, I love your pictures. Carolyn would love to go and photograph with you one day. She's the Pixel Nomad. She did a talk earlier today and shared a lot of her beautiful photos and videos and so much history. So that was
Oh,
great.
that's
But
great.
yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't take people with me. I just don't. I go by myself.
Well, thank you for being here, Carol. We appreciate your time. We appreciate all that you do. And I know that you'll keep us posted on the lawsuit and other ways that we can
Absolutely.
help. So thank you for being a part of this. And we'll see everybody soon at the next presentation. Thank you, Carol.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.